The Pentagon had a name for them. It was never written in any official document. It never appeared in any after-action report or strategic assessment. But in the hallways of the United States Department of Defense, in the private conversations between generals and intelligence officers, the term circulated freely. They called them the psychos. And in 1966, the United States military made a decision that would never be publicly acknowledged. They gave an entire province of South Vietnam to the psychos, not because they wanted to, because they had no other choice. The story begins with a problem the American military refused to admit it had. Phuoc Tuy province sat approximately 70 kilometers southeast of Saigon. On paper, it was a secondary theater, not the highlands where major engagements occurred. Not the delta where American river patrols fought running battles, just a coastal province with rubber plantations, scattered villages, and jungle, the kind of place that should have been manageable. It was not manageable. United States forces had been attempting to pacify Phuoc Tuy since 1965. Every operation followed the same pattern. American units would sweep through an area with overwhelming firepower. They would report enemy casualties. They would declare the area cleared, and within weeks the Viet Cong would be operating there again, as if nothing had happened. The enemy was not being defeated. They were being temporarily inconvenienced. Intelligence reports told a story that commanders preferred not to discuss. American patrols in Phuoc Tuy were being detected and ambushed at rates significantly higher than the national average. Casualty figures suggested something was systematically wrong with how operations were being conducted. The province had become what military planners quietly called a meat grinder. Young Americans went in, aluminum boxes came out, and nothing changed. So in early 1966, the United States military made a calculation. They would hand Phuoc Tuy to the Australians. Let the Allies deal with the problem. Let someone else bleed in that particular stretch of jungle. What American commanders did not anticipate was that the Australians would succeed where they had failed, and that success would become a professional humiliation that the Pentagon would spend decades trying to forget. The first Australian troops arrived at Nui Dat in June 1966. They were not what American observers expected. Elite Special Operations soldiers from the Australian Special Air Service Regiment stepped off transport aircraft, looking like they had been living in the wilderness for weeks, rather than preparing for deployment. Their uniforms were not pressed. Their equipment was not standard. Several were carrying rifles that appeared to have been deliberately damaged. American military police who processed the arrivals noted their observations in reports that would later be classified. Something was wrong with these soldiers. They did not look professional. They did not act professional. They smelled like they had stopped bathing sometime in the previous month. The smell was not an accident. It was doctrine. And it was the first indication that the Australians operated according to principles the American military did not understand and was not prepared to learn. Within 60 days, something strange began appearing in intelligence summaries. Viet Cong activity in Phuoc Tuy province was declining. Not gradually, precipitously. Ambush frequency dropped, supply movements decreased, recruitment in local villages slowed to a fraction of previous rates. American intelligence analysts initially attributed this to seasonal factors. Then they suggested the enemy was repositioning for operations elsewhere. Then they stopped offering explanations because none of their explanations made sense. The Australians were doing something different. Whatever it was working. The methodology would not be understood by American observers for years. Some would never understand it. The Australians had rejected virtually every principle that governed American counterinsurgency operations. They rejected speed. American doctrine emphasized rapid movement, aggressive patrolling, maintaining initiative through constant action. Australian patrols moved at speeds that American officers found incomprehensible, 100 meters per hour, sometimes slower. A patrol covering 5 kilometers could take the better part of a week. To Americans raised on the principle that time was a weapon, this seemed like cowardice disguised as caution. It was neither. It was hunting. The jungle in Phuoc Tuy province had average visibility of 10 to 15 meters. In some areas, less. A patrol moving at American speeds created disturbances detectable from hundreds of meters away, snapping branches, rustling vegetation, vibrations transmitted through root systems that experienced trackers could feel through the soles of their feet. Birds went silent. Insects changed their patterns. Monkeys altered their calls. The jungle announced American presence to anyone trained to listen. The Viet Cong were trained to listen. They had been fighting in this environment for 20 years. They knew every signal the jungle produced. And American patrols broadcast their location with every step. At 100 meters per hour, no signal existed. The Australian trooper would take a single step, placing his foot with precision that avoided any surface that might compress or crack. Then, the entire patrol would freeze. Complete stillness for minutes at a time, not reduced movement, zero movement. During those frozen intervals, they would scan their surroundings using only their eyes, never turning their heads. They would read the air for scents that might indicate enemy presence. They would process every sound the jungle produced, identifying each bird call, each insect drone, each rustle of wind through canopy. After minutes of absolute stillness, another step, another freeze. The jungle soundscape never changed. Birds kept singing. Insects kept droning. To any enemy scout monitoring the area, everything sounded perfectly normal. There was nothing to investigate, nothing to ambush, nothing to report. The smell doctrine was equally alien to American understanding. Every United States soldier in Vietnam received standard hygiene supplies, soap, deodorant, shaving cream, toothpaste, insect repellent with chemical compounds that could be detected at remarkable distances. The military considered personal cleanliness essential for discipline and morale. Clean soldiers were professional soldiers. This assumption had governed American thinking since the trenches of France in 1917. It had become so fundamental that no one questioned whether it applied to jungle warfare against an enemy who had spent decades learning to exploit exactly such assumptions. Captured Viet Cong fighters confirmed in interrogation after interrogation that American patrols could be detected by smell from over 500 meters away. The chemical signature of American hygiene products was completely alien to the jungle environment. Deodorant created scent trails that lingered for hours in humid air. The distinctive sweet smell of American cigarettes announced patrol positions to any enemy scout within a kilometer. The Americans smelled like a department store had wandered into the wilderness. The Australians smelled like death. 2 weeks before any patrol, Special Air Service troopers stopped using soap entirely. They abandoned deodorant, shaving cream, commercial toothpaste. They switched from manufactured cigarettes to local tobacco or quit entirely. They ate indigenous food, including fermented fish sauce that altered body chemistry over time. They did not wash their uniforms. By insertion day, they produced no scent distinguishable from the jungle itself. Rot, mud, vegetable decay. They smelled exactly like their environment because they had become part of their environment. The results were documented in classified reports that American commanders found difficult to process. Viet Cong patrols routinely passed within meters of concealed Australian positions without detecting anything unusual. In one verified incident from late 1967, an enemy fighter actually stepped on an Australian trooper's boot, looked down, registered nothing but jungle debris, and continued walking. The trooper did not move, did not react, did not breathe visibly. The enemy soldier never knew he had placed his foot on a human being who could have ended his life before his next heartbeat. But the Viet Cong kept walking because there was nothing to see, nothing to smell, nothing to hear. The jungle was empty, except it was not. The weapons confused American observers even more than the smell. Several Australian Special Air Service troopers carried rifles that appeared to have been deliberately mutilated. The barrels were too short, proportions were wrong. When American ordnance officers examined them closely, they discovered that someone had taken hacksaws to precision military weapons and removed approximately 15 centimeters from the barrel. This was not battlefield damage. This was deliberate modification performed in the Australian armory. American weapons specialists were appalled. The modifications had ruined the ballistics. Effective range had been reduced by at least 60%. They had created something loud, inaccurate, and unprofessional. The Australians called the modified weapon the bitch, and it was perfectly designed for the environment where it would actually be used. At 400 meters, a standard rifle was accurate and effective, but there was no 400 meters in the jungle. There was 10 meters. There was 15 meters. A weapon designed for long-range accuracy was useless when you could not see past the next tree. Worse, the full-length barrel constantly snagged on vines, bamboo, and undergrowth. Every snag required stopping to free the weapon. Every stop created noise. Every noise could mean detection. The shortened barrel eliminated snags. The loss of long-range accuracy was irrelevant because there was no long range, and the heavy 7.62 millimeter round delivered stopping power that the American 5.56 millimeter could not match at close quarters. The footwear was perhaps the strangest element of all. Several Australian troopers wore sandals, not military boots. Sandals made from old automobile tires with straps cut from inner tubes. American observers recognized them immediately. They were Ho Chi Minh sandals, standard Viet Cong footwear manufactured throughout North Vietnam and along jungle supply routes. Why were Australian soldiers wearing enemy footwear? The answer revealed a level of tactical sophistication that American doctrine had never contemplated. Every boot left distinctive impressions. American jungle boots had specific tread patterns recognizable to any experienced tracker. A Viet Cong scout who found American boot prints knew exactly what he was following. He could estimate numbers, direction of travel, approximate time since passage. He would raise alarm. He would call for ambush teams. The Australians left tracks indistinguishable from Viet Cong movement. A tracker who found these prints would assume he was following friendly forces. He might walk directly into the Australian patrol, believing he was meeting comrades. The Viet Cong, who had tracked French colonial forces for years, who tracked American patrols almost at will, could not track the Australians. The hunters found themselves unable to locate their prey. Documents captured in late 1968 revealed how completely the enemy understood the difference between fighting Americans and fighting Australians. For American forces, Viet Cong tactical guidance emphasized predictability and vulnerability. American units used helicopter insertion, creating noise signatures detectable from kilometers away. American patrols moved at trackable speeds. American soldiers could be smelled from 500 meters. Recommended approach was aggressive ambush at carefully selected locations. Inflict maximum casualties in the first 30 seconds. Withdraw before artillery becomes effective. Reposition for subsequent engagements. For Australian forces, the guidance was radically different. Australian patrols were acknowledged as extremely difficult to detect. They could not be smelled because they eliminated chemical signatures. They could not be heard because they moved too slowly to create sound. They could not be tracked because their techniques made trail following impossible. Recommended approach was avoidance. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Do not attempt ambush because Australians were more likely to detect the trap before entering it than to walk into it unknowingly. If contact was unavoidable, break it off as quickly as possible and withdraw to areas where Australian patrols were not operating. The documents used a specific term for Australian soldiers that was applied to no other allied force: Ma Rung, Vietnamese for phantoms of the jungle, jungle ghosts. The term carried supernatural connotations exceeding ordinary military respect. The Viet Cong were not merely cautious about Australian forces, they were afraid in ways they were never afraid of Americans. The statistics told the story the Pentagon preferred to suppress. Australian Special Air Service patrols in Phuoc Tuy province achieved casualty ratios that defied what American experience suggested was possible. For every Australian lost, estimates suggest approximately 500 enemy were eliminated. American units conducting similar missions in adjacent sectors averaged 1 to 12. The disparity was not marginal, it was catastrophic. It suggested one approach was functioning while another was systematically failing. These numbers did not result from Australian soldiers being braver or better marksmen. They resulted from Australian soldiers being invisible. They struck from positions no enemy expected. They disappeared before effective response was possible. They had transformed from prey into apex predators by rejecting every assumption that governed American operations. By 1968, Phuoc Tuy province had become what intelligence analysts called a quiet zone. Not pacified in the American sense of the word, the Viet Cong infrastructure still existed. The political organization still functioned. But enemy military operations had decreased to a fraction of what occurred in comparable provinces under American control. The jungle ghosts had made the province too dangerous for the enemy to operate in freely. American commanders observed this result. They documented it. They classified the documentation. They did not change their own methods. The question that haunts this history is why? The evidence was overwhelming. The Australians shared their methods freely with American counterparts. Individual Americans recognized value in Australian techniques and advocated adoption. The lessons were available for anyone willing to learn. But institutions do not change because evidence demands change. They change when the cost of not changing becomes unbearable. And for the American military in Vietnam, the cost was distributed across thousands of individual casualties rather than concentrated in a single catastrophic event that might force immediate reform. Each ambush patrol was a separate incident. Each detected unit was an individual failure that could be attributed to specific circumstances rather than systematic flaws. The pattern was visible only in aggregate statistics that senior commanders had professional reasons not to examine closely. To acknowledge that Australian methods worked better would require acknowledging that American methods were failing. To adopt Australian techniques would require admitting that speed, technology, and firepower were not solving the problem. The institutions that had built their identity around these principles could not accept conclusions that undermine their foundations. So the Pentagon called them psychos. Officers who questioned why Americans could not achieve what Australians achieved were quietly reassigned. Reports documenting Australian success were classified at levels that prevented wide distribution. The lessons that could have saved lives were filed and forgotten while the casualties accumulated. Phuoc Tuy remained quiet under Australian control. Adjacent provinces under American control remained killing grounds. The pattern continued until the war ended. But there is another dimension to this story that tactical analysis tends to overlook. The Australian methods that produced such remarkable survival ratios carried costs measured in different currencies. Psychological currencies, the currency of what it cost to become what the jungle demanded. Operating at 100 meters per hour for weeks in enemy territory required transformation that left permanent marks on those who underwent it. The constant hypervigilance could not be maintained without consequences. The absolute suppression of normal human impulses created patterns that did not reverse when the mission ended. Some veterans describe the experience as becoming something other than human, not metaphorically savage, literally shedding human thought patterns that interfered with survival. Human minds generate constant internal noise, plans, anxieties, memories, anticipations. This noise is invisible to us because it is constant, but it shapes behavior in ways that skilled observers can detect. A person thinking about tomorrow moves differently than a person existing entirely in the present moment. The jungle ghosts learn to eliminate this noise entirely, to exist in a state of pure sensory awareness for days without the normal operations of human consciousness, to perceive without interpreting, to observe without planning, to respond without deliberating. This state was tactically invaluable. It made them invisible in ways that physical concealment alone could not achieve. An enemy scout might look directly at a concealed Australian position and see nothing unusual because the Australian occupying that position was generating no behavioral signals for the scout to detect. But this state was not something that could be switched off when the patrol ended. Veterans reported difficulties readjusting to civilian life that exceeded what standard models would predict. Hypervigilance persisting for years after service ended. Struggles with relationships because the emotional openness that relationships require was precisely what they had trained themselves to suppress. The Viet Cong called them Ma Rung, jungle ghosts. But ghosts are creatures caught between worlds, neither fully present in one realm nor able to return to another. The men who mastered jungle warfare found themselves similarly suspended, not fully present in the civilian world they returned to, not able to forget the jungle world they had inhabited. Some never found their way back completely. This was the price of effectiveness that no statistical analysis captured. The Australian methods worked. The survival rates indicated it beyond reasonable dispute. But survival was not the same as returning whole. Coming home alive was not the same as coming home unchanged. The legacy extends to the present day, though often without proper attribution. When the United States military finally began serious reform of its special operations capabilities in the 1980s, the reforms incorporated principles that Australians had demonstrated effective decades earlier. Emphasis on small unit tactics, prioritization of stealth and patience over firepower and aggression, understanding that environmental integration could achieve results that technology alone could not deliver. The modern American special operations community owes significant debt to pioneers who proved what was possible in the jungles of Phuoc Tuy province. The methods were there. The evidence was overwhelming. The psychos were willing to teach. The institutions were not willing to learn. Not until decades had passed and the lessons had been paid for again in blood. The American officers who served alongside Australians in Vietnam mostly kept their observations to themselves. Some wrote memoirs that mentioned what they witnessed. Some testified before congressional committees in closed sessions. Some simply carried the knowledge that everything they had been taught about warfare was wrong for the environment where they had been sent to fight. The captain who watched Australian Special Air Service troopers saw off their rifle barrels called them idiots. 6 days later, those same idiots saved his command from annihilation by infiltrating an enemy battalion and calling artillery strikes from inside the perimeter. He never forgot. Neither did the Pentagon. They just chose not to remember publicly. Phuoc Tuy province remained under Australian control until 1971. When the last Australian forces withdrew, the quiet zone became loud again almost immediately. The methods that had made the province stable could not be replicated by forces trained in different doctrines. The jungle ghosts departed, the enemy returned, and the war continued its bloody trajectory toward the conclusion that awaited. The psychos are mostly gone now. The men who learned to smell like death and move like shadows have aged into their 70s and 80s. Some have died. Some carry memories they never discuss. Some occasionally speak to researchers or journalists, trying to explain what it was like to become invisible in a jungle that killed everyone it could see. Their methods are studied in military academies around the world. Their techniques inform special operations doctrine across multiple nations. Their success is acknowledged by everyone except the institution that refused to learn from them when learning might have mattered. The question remains whether those lessons have truly been absorbed. Every new conflict produces variations on the same fundamental theme: technological overconfidence meeting environmental reality, institutional assumptions colliding with conditions those assumptions cannot address, the expensive approach failing, while the simple approach succeeds. The Australians solved the problem in 1966. The Pentagon spent decades pretending the solution did not exist. Some would argue they are still pretending. Rung, the phantoms of the jungle, the soldiers who were dismissed as primitives until they proved themselves masters. The ghosts who saved the men who mocked them. That is their legacy. That is what they demonstrated. That is what they left behind for anyone willing to pay attention. The question is whether those who need the lessons most will ever be willing to accept them. The Australians answered that question more than 50 years ago. The institutions that ignored them are still formulating their response. This video is for historical and educational purposes only.